And we are back on the build phase. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and on today's episode, we are going to talk about Radlands. And specifically within Radlands, we are going to talk about camp cards. Now, what are camp cards? Well, camp cards are a number of things within the game. First and foremost, they act essentially as your health total. So each player gets 3 of these cards to start the game. Each card can take 1 hit, which makes it damage, and then a second hit before it's destroyed. Once a card is destroyed, it is done. So functionally speaking, all players start every game of Radlands with 6 hit points. Again, that's 3 camps. Each camp can take 2 hits before it's gone for good. Now, there are plenty of cards within Radlands that allow you to heal camps or other things, so you're not limited to just 6 hit points in each game, but that is where each player starts. Now, in addition to being a very pretty health tracker within the game, all camps have an ability. Now, some of these abilities are much better than others. Some of the abilities kind of require you to draw certain cards or have access to specific things in order to get any kind of benefit or value out of them. And some of the abilities maybe aren't the best. And part of what we're going to do today is we are going to rank these camps as far as whether they're a gold medal, a silver medal, or a bronze medal camp. At the end of this, we're going to have 3 lines here, and I may need to go and make some adjustments here as I think things through in real time. The last thing that camps do is they dictate how many cards you get to draw at the beginning of the game. A lot of them say 1, some of them say 2, a few of them say 0, and one of them says 3. Now, as a player who likes to draw a lot of cards and who goes after those types of strategies within card games, this number matters to me a great deal. I will take a camp that has a Bobo ability if it lets me draw more cards at the start of the game, because those cards are eventually going to be where my damage output is coming from, where the value that I'm putting on the board is coming from. So it is important to pay attention to the abilities the camps have, but you also have to keep in mind that some camps are essentially blank unless you have the right cards, unless you have access to the right things within your deck. And because Radlands is not a game where you get to weed out cards that don't fit your strategy, the deck is going to be full of things that may or may not synergize with your camps at any given time. So flexibility is an important factor within the camps. How much do they pigeonhole you? Is the card blank unless you have very specific draws? How many cards does it let you draw at the start of the game? These are all factors that weigh in when making your camp decision. So at the start of a game of Radlands, you get 6 camps and you have to choose 3 of them. Out of those 3, what do you look for? Well, generally speaking, I look for cards that synergize well. If I have a camp that generates punks or gives me access to cheaper characters, then maybe another camp that requires a certain number of characters to be in play to do something, or discounting an ability down if there's a bunch of dudes in play. Those are camps that I might take within that context, but in a more general setting, those might not be my favorite. So as we work our way through this, I'm going to talk about synergy, I'm going to talk about overall value, and of course we're going to rank it because it's fun to rank some things. So let's get started with our first camp. This is the parachute base. So this camp allows you to draw 1 card, which is okay. It's not a 0. As long as it's not a 0, I'm kind of okay with it. 2s are almost gravy, but lets you draw 1 card, and then for free, you can play a person and use your ability and then damage that person. You still have to pay for that ability. So what are the situations where you would want to use this card? Well, that would be things like you have a card in hand like Sniper, where you pay the cost to get her into play, and then you get to use her right now. There are absolutely going to be times, game states within Radlands, where this power is going to let you to put a person into play and that person is going to win you the game. There are also going to be times where putting the person into play and paying for it now means you can't do anything else with your turn, and now that person's damaged and you're not going to be able to use them again next turn. Is that really where you want to be? So I do like that the parachute base allows for burst damage that your opponent didn't see coming, damage that kind of comes out of nowhere. The drawback is that you have to both pay. You're not getting anything for free here. And in fact, you're wounding the character to be able to use their power a little bit faster than you normally would. I am not a big fan of this card, but it's certainly a playable, and depending upon the makeup of your hand and what cards you draw, it could end up giving you the ability to just win the game out of nowhere when your opponent thought they were set up and protected. Next up, we have the Scavenger Camp. So this is the first time we've seen a couple of really important powers show up. Before I get to those, though, this is a draw 1 card. So again, this is average, I would say. The first power on this card is pay 2 to advance a raid or event. I think that is the absolute number one thing that I look for when choosing camps in this game. I want camps that give me the ability to advance raider events. I think raiders are the most reliable, most consistent source of damage. Your opponent really can't deal with them, and they go off at the start of your turn. So you're in a position after your raiders pop off to make more educated choices. Oh, your opponent says, oh, I'm going to damage this camp with the raider, not knowing that you have the ability to then destroy that camp. Excellent, excellent power. Now, paying 2 to move a raider forward is a little bit of expensive. I mean, on any given turn, you only have access to 3 water unless you have cards you can junk in your hand or you stash a water silo in a previous turn. So this is going to be the majority of your turn, the majority of the time. But this, plus a couple of cards that you can junk for a raider event, could be 1 damage for 2 cards and 2 water. And that is a good deal. That is not a deal that anybody should poo-poo or look over. Having a camp that activates a raider event is really good. On top of that, this allows you to heal. Now, it is a limited heal, so we have to balance all of this. You're only paying 1, which is really cheap to get a heal effect. Normally you have to pay a whole card by junking a card, or you have to pay, there's some other effects that allow you to heal, but they cost more than 1 water. This one only costs 1 water. The drawback is you can only use it on a turn when your raider event went off. So is this card plus your natural card draw going to consistently guarantee that you have access to this healing enough? Probably not by itself. You're probably going to want a second camp that also has the ability to advance raiders, maybe one where you only have to pay 1 to advance raiders, and those 2 camps working together will give you consistent access to this healing ability, which can be really devastating for your opponent. If you're hitting them with raiders every turn and you're able to get a heal off, notice these costs here add up to 3 water. So 3 water is an important number because that's how many you get every turn for free. This card could, with not a whole heck of a lot of assistance, end up being a major problem for any opponent. In general, I highly value any card that allows me to start or move ahead a raid because raiding in this game is so powerful. Next up, we have the Supply Depot. Now, this is the first time we've seen a card that allows you to draw 2. I almost don't care about what the rest of this is. Generally, when I'm drafting my camps or when I'm choosing my camps out of my initial 6, what I'm looking for is a couple camps that work well together and a camp that lets me draw 2 cards. I will sometimes take 3 camps that I don't even care about if they all have the number 2, so I start the game with 6 cards in my hand, compared to an opponent who maybe took a couple of better camps, but they only let them draw 1 card and one that doesn't let them draw any. So I start the game with 6 cards, you start the game with 2 cards. That is a massive advantage. And the thing about Radlands is, once somebody gets ahead, it can be very difficult to catch up. Like, the catch-up mechanics in this game kind of have a window, and the longer you go behind, the more that window closes. So it's not unheard of for a player to take an early lead and then essentially ride that early lead to victory. And within the game, you have to be prepared for that. So choosing to start the game, like, I would never, ever, under any circumstances, choose 3 camps that have 0 draw. So you start the game with no cards. I mean, you do draw a card on your first turn. Even if you're the player going first, you still draw that card. Important rule point. You get less water, but you still get to draw your card. That said, 1 card starting the game? No. So the 2 that's on this card definitely is a big value. That's an unignorable part of the card. Now, the next power that it does, or the power that it has, is you pay 2 water and then you draw 2 cards. That's what these purple symbols are. But one thing I really like about this game is how much of the rules are summed up just by little symbols. And once they're generally self-explanatory. Even if you have to look them up, there's a rules card that's right there. Always, I mean, it's in the same box with all the other cards. So it's easy to keep that handy when you're teaching new people. And once you see it and identify it, it's pretty easy to look at this green symbol. It goes up like that. Oh, that's a raider. Oh, that's a like, the symbols that are used within this game make it shortcuts so much of the rules learning and the explanation process. Anyway, I love Radlands, by the way. So this lets you draw 2 cards and then you have to discard 1. I don't think that's necessarily worth 2 water. By default, without any camp, just on your board as part of the basic game rules, you are allowed to pay 2 water and draw a card. So this essentially lets you do the same thing, only you get to choose between 2 cards. That is marginally better than the default game rules, but I would never select this card for that power. That said, I would absolutely select the card for this number right here. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 2, or put the supply depot up here as a gold medal potential camp, and that's entirely on the back of starting the game with 2 cards as opposed to 1 or 0. Next up, we have the Warehouse. This is a draw 1 card, and for 0 water, you can damage this card. That doesn't sound very good. And discard 1 or more cards that are not the water silo, and then draw that many cards plus 1. This is a risky proposition. So again, you start the game with 6 health. This, for free, you can damage this, throw resources out of your hand to then draw resources plus 1. Now, it does say you can't use the water silo, which makes sense because that's like the one renewable hand resource that you can get basically at any point throughout any game of Radlands. You can always, if you want to, you can always have the water silo in your hand. So it's good that you're not allowed to throw that card away to generate more card advantage. But essentially what this is doing is it's letting you trade card advantage you already have for different cards, maybe better, maybe worse, you don't know, plus 1. So for free, give up your hand, draw that number plus an extra card. This is aggressively middle of the road. It has a 1 here, so it's not a total throwaway. I don't think I've ever used this power. I hate damaging my own camps, because if I do this and somebody is able to do damage from hand with it, or pick off the protector and now they can hit it, there's so many ways. I do not like damaging my own camps. I'm not into it. This power isn't that good. This is going to be our first rank 3 card here. Let's do our spacing just a little bit better. I'm not a big fan of the Warehouse. It's not the worst card. I'm not going to be furious if this ends up in my opening hand, because at least I get to draw an extra card, but I am not going to use that power unless I'm digging for a Hail Mary. Like if my Raider is set up to go off and it's the kill shot, sure, I'll damage my thing. Maybe I draw a card I can junk for a raid to finish you off. But outside of those types of situations, I would never do this just because. I would be fishing for a specific thing to end the game. Otherwise, this power's blank and it just lets you draw a card. Not super impressed with that camp. The Labor Camp. Draw 1, decent start. For 0, you can destroy one of your people and then heal a card. This is quite good, but it needs a little something. You have to have people in play, and you have to have disposable people in play. Because if I have like a legendary card, if I have Mulcher Stang out and I destroy him, like I'm in the position, this is my last camp, this is my last hit, I'm going to die if I don't do it. I kill my people and then I do this. Well, my opponent, now I have an unprotected camp. So you have to at least have enough board presence that you can feel comfortable nuking some of your own dudes just to be able to heal something. Now that's absolutely worth it. That's a good exchange rate, especially if it's like a no value card like a Punk or like a Wounded Soldier, something that came out and generated value when it came into play, but you don't really need it for anything other than just being a meat shield. That said, if you don't have the board advantage, if you don't have another camp that lets you generate characters or put characters into play for a reduced cost, you may end up in a situation where you never really get to use this power. That being said, it's pretty good. If in the places where you have the stuff to actually activate this and not leave yourself vulnerable, this card is great. In the games where you never build enough of a board to actually use this power, this card is a draw 1 blank ability. I'm going to stick it in rank 2 for now, but I'll be honest, this one healing is so good and so important in this game. I could see putting this into the gold medal tier. What if you don't draw the camp that lets you generate punks for free? What if you don't draw cards that are cheap? Like if you're only drawing 2 or 3 cost characters, so you can't put stuff out on the board, this thing's just blank. It's rough. So, silver medal for that one. Juggernaut. Okay. So, Juggernaut doesn't let you draw any cards. To start off, that's a pretty bad one. I think this is the first 0 we've seen. Yeah, it's the first 0 we've seen. Drawing 0 cards at the start of the game, you need to be getting value from somewhere else. So if there's a camp that doesn't let you draw any cards, you need to make sure that you have the necessary synergy effects to work with whatever powers that camp has, so that it's giving you something else other than opening hand. If there's a card that needs a bunch of dudes in play that gives you 0, and you don't have anything that lets you generate dudes, why did you take that instead of one of your other camps? Like, that's all that comes down to. So the Juggernaut does actually do a really cool, unique thing that no other camp can do. It's essentially they're all one of a kind, but there's a lot of redundancy between the powers across camps, except with this one. So what the Juggernaut is, for 1 water, you can move this space 1 forward. Any people that you have in front of it end up moving behind it if you choose. So generally speaking, in Radlands, you have your 3 rows. You have your camp in the back, and then you have 2 slots where you can put people. For 1 water, you can move the Juggernaut forward. Now, this is an ability, so you have to take a water chip, put it on there. You can't do it twice in 1 turn. That would be sick. Next turn, you move it 1 forward again. Also, if there's a person in front of this protecting it, then they can move behind. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, because once the Juggernaut moves from the front row into the opposing row, so it's the 3rd move essentially, then your opponent has to destroy one of their camps. Not damage, destroy. So that's a really strong effect. Overall, you're paying 3 water to fully destroy a camp. When you compare that to the exchange rate of, say, something like Sniper, you have to pay water to get the Sniper in play. Her power costs 2 every time you use it. So to deal the same amount of damage directly to a camp would cost you 4 water plus the casting cost of the Sniper herself. So it's a much more expensive proposition. Juggernaut is a way cheaper way to just destroy a camp. The problem is that distance between move number 2 and move number 3. Typically speaking, your camps are in the back row and you have people cards in front of your camp. So if your opponent has some piddly little 1-drop that can pay 1 to deal the damage, that guy has to chop his way through all of the people that you have played in front of your camp. Well, you move the Juggernaut forward, now there's only 1 person protecting it. You move it forward 1 more time, and this is an imminent threat. This is a kill on sight kind of card if you're playing against somebody who has any idea what they're doing within the game of Radlands. And it can't be protected. So you have this inevitability as it moves forward, but if your opponent is shrewd and they know what they're doing, they're going to save up a couple ways to deal damage to this, and it doesn't have to be some kind of special like Sniper. It's just damage. You can just junk 2 cards and kill this camp outright right before it ruins your day. So while I do love that the Juggernaut does a totally unique thing, and it does a powerful thing, and it does a fun thing against any kind of a player, this is never going to go off. They're going to see it coming literally from a mile away or from 2 squares away, and they're going to prepare. They have at least 3 turns to prepare and make sure their hand is set up so that as soon as that Juggernaut moves to that front spot and it's vulnerable, they can make sure that it ends up like this as opposed to one of their camps ending up like this. And for that, plus the 0 card draw, I'm hesitant to even put this here other than that it's so much fun. From a competitive standpoint, I think it's probably fair to put the Juggernaut down into the bronze tier. From a fun standpoint, if you're just playing games to have fun with people, you could almost put it in tier 1, but because it just leaves you too vulnerable. I think it leaves you too vulnerable, and ultimately, a lot of games in which the Juggernaut gets played, it gets very close to doing its cool thing, and then it gets killed before it actually pulls off the cool thing. Sometimes it does go off, though. Sometimes your opponent, during those 3 turns, isn't able to draw the necessary stuff, and this is a 3-cost Destroy a Camp card, which is amazing, but I don't think you can really count on it. Next camp, Transplant Lab. This lets you draw 2, so we'll just put it up here. We don't need to talk about the rest. Drawing 2 cards is very strong. This also has pay a water. If you have put 2 or more people into play this turn, heal. Now, putting 2 or more people into play on a single turn is sometimes a big ask. Your hand has to cooperate. If all you're drawing is high-cost cards, you're going to have to set this up by water siloing in 1 turn, so you have access to 4 water in the next turn, and then you can get 2 people into play, and then you need another water, so you got to junk something in order to be able to actually use this. So there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through for this card to get the ability to work. If you do it, it's great. This card lets you start the game with 2 cards instead of 1, which is a big deal, in my opinion, and it gives you access to healing. Yes, there's some hoop jumping to get to that healing, but healing is so powerful. There's very few times in the game where it shows up without some amount of hoop jumping. So I think Transplant Lab is a tier 1 gold medal camp. Next up, the Omen Clock. If I was going to make like a top 5 list, the Omen Clock would be on it. So what this card says is pay 1, move your raiders up 1. So it doesn't actually say that. It says pay 1 and advance any event by 1. It lets you draw 1 card when you start the game. So this, combined with any other camp that lets you put a raider in, you can spend your whole turn starting and moving a raid up and being in position to hit your opponent on the next turn. This is really, really good. This camp is fantastic. This camp is a kill on sight camp. If you see that your opponent has a combination of the Omen Clock plus anything that generates raiders, it's a tough decision which one you kill first. I'm inclined to say the Omen Clock because it has that little bit of extra flexibility where you can sometimes get this to go off on a non-raider event. And the event cards, when they go off in the right situation, are typically strong. The problem is so many of them, in my opinion, are so narrow and they clog up the event track so my raids can't go off as often. So I don't play with a lot of events typically, but this also gives you the flexibility to play with more events, not only because you're able to accelerate them, which is very good, but because you can get them out of the way. That acceleration in and of itself, you get the value sooner from the events that you play. But more importantly, by getting that value early, you get them out of the way for your raids. I think the Omen Clock is not only a gold medal camp, it could potentially be like S tier if I was the kind of person who did S tiers. Next up, we have the Victory Totem. This is one of the recommended camps for starting the game, teaching new players to play, and I really like it for both that reason and in general it's a strong card. So the symbols on this card are important. We have the ability to pay 2 and injure. Now injure is damage that can't hit camps. So this can pick off or prevent the use of an enemy power. Oh, enemies mean people, not camps. Think about it this way. If there's a bunch of people shooting guns at you, the guns aren't your enemy. If you deal with the enemies, you could even take their guns and use them. So the camps aren't the enemy, the buildings aren't the enemy, enemies are the enemy. Page 11, center column, bottom of the thing, it's right there. Anyway, so this lets you injure opposing people, which is nice to get dudes out of the way, get rid of them, as well as pay 2 and advance a raid. And this card lets you draw 1 card. So everything about this is good value for a good price. This isn't bonkers value town stuff like I think Omen Clock. If you have that as one of your camps and you draw the right hand and you can produce raiders and events, this is just value town all across the world. This is more like fair value. Both of these powers are really strong. They give you the flexibility to deal with the type of board state that you have. Are you trying to get at camps right now, or are you trying to deal with problematic people? Being able to have something like this, so as soon as your opponent plays that legendary card and they advance 3 or 4 water into a single person, you damage them right away so they get no value out of it. That's really strong. Honestly, if this was a draw 0 card with these same powers, it would still be very choosable. So I think this is one of those times where this is both a good teaching card because it gives a new player access to some important abilities and have them right there at their fingertips to learn the game. But it's also overall a strong enough card that when this comes up in my 6 camp selection pool, it often ends up being one of the 3 that I put in my deck. Next up, we have the Blood Bank. This is a draw 1 for 0 power. You can destroy one of your people and generate 1 water. We kind of have something a little similar with that here with the Labor Camp. It lets you draw 1 card at the start of the game, and then for free you can kill somebody and you can generate healing. Healing is way better than a single water. So the Blood Bank is functionally the exact same play pattern as a Labor Camp, and it just gives you less value. So it's subject to all of the same drawbacks of the Labor Camp in that if you don't have a board state, if you have no way to generate punks, if you have no cheap cards, no cheap people to play, you basically get no value out of this. And if you jump through the hoops that this card wants you to do, the value that you get is a water silo, 1 extra water a turn. Yes, yes, yes. There will be times where that 1 extra water does make a big difference. Particularly if you have, I can't remember what the name of the camp is, we'll get to it, the one that lets you generate free punks. Those 2 together, that synergy is worth looking at if you have both of those in your draft. But in a vacuum, Blood Bank by itself, that is a bronze medal at best. Next up, we have the Oasis. I like this one a lot. You draw 1 card at the start of the game, so it's not a 2-card draw, but 1 card is... I guess the way to think about it is 1 card is fine, 0 cards is a negative drawback, so you better be getting value out of that card from somewhere else. 2 cards is gravy, and 3 cards is terrible. Bust, so to speak. We'll get to it. So Oasis, if you have no people in this column, your people cost 1 less to play in this column. So this is one of the cards, one of the camps that I was referring to with things like Blood Bank and Labor Camp, where it lets you generate extra people to the board for reduced cost. If you can combine Blood Bank and Oasis, and you draw a bunch of 1-cost cards that you can play for free, generate extra water here, you can essentially use your people as a water tower. Kind of gross when you think about it. Or in the instance of Labor Camp, you could use those people that this lets you put into play for free to heal other more valuable people. Oasis is a very good card. I noticed that having so many like tier 1 camps is maybe getting a little top heavy, but I think it's a credit to Radlands that so many of the cards are playables. There's not often times when I look at my 6 camps and I go, these are all terrible. I can't do anything with this. And I think that's a credit to the game design. The Octagon. So this is one of my favorites, largely because I'm a massive fan of mixed martial arts. So I like the Octagon, and I like the flavor of the power. Pay a water, destroy one of your people, and if you do, your opponent destroys one of theirs. Is there anything more symbolic of a mixed martial art fight than 2 dudes getting destroyed? And you draw 0 with this. So as far as game mechanics, if I set aside the theme and I look at the game mechanics, this is another card that falls into the same trap as the Blood Bank and the Labor Camp. Whereas if you have things like the Oasis to generate extra or cheaper people to the board, you can probably get value out of this. There's probably good things you can do with this. Oh, I control a Mulcher Stang, you control an Octagon and a Punk. That is a great trade. You're destroying a Punk to take out one of my legendaries? That's excellent. That's not always going to be the case. That is definitely peak value. And there's certainly going to be games where you simply don't have enough board presence to where if you do this, you're running the risk of leaving yourself vulnerable and leaving your camps unprotected for potentially not great value. So while I love the theme of this card, man. So is destroying one person better value than a water? Yes. Is destroying one person better value than healing somebody? Again, I kind of have to say yes, because a heal is like half. Like each person, again, if we think about you put somebody into play, they're ready. When they get damaged, now they're not ready, you can't use their powers, but they're damaged, they can be healed back. Destroying somebody takes them out of play entirely. They're just gone, so they cannot be recovered from that. So based on the analysis of Labor Camp, Labor Camp requires you to have a board. This card requires you to have a board. Labor Camp lets you heal something, which is arguably a slightly less powerful effect than outright destroying something. So it seems like maybe these are both tier 2 cards, but I'm afraid I have to slot this one down here in the bronze tier, and that comes down to this number right here. If Octagon let you draw one card, I would bump it up a tier. It doesn't. You're taking kind of a risk when you choose this card, unless you have, again, synergy cards that put value out onto the board. Drawing 0 cards with this, I just think is unreasonable. I don't think the effect is that good, as much as I love it. Next up, we have the Mercenary Camp. This is another draw 0 starting camp, something, again, I'm not a big fan of. You pay 2 and destroy one of the opponent's cards of their choice unless they discard 2 cards. Water Silo cannot be one of the discarded cards. Again, Water Silo is an infinite resource. Discarding is basically no punishment at all. So here's the thing. If you're shrewd with this, you never get the discard. You always use this when your opponent's hand is gassed out and you get to just straight up destroy something. So this card feels similar to the Octagon in that you're getting to destroy a thing. The difference is this doesn't require you to have something of your own that you destroyed first. It just requires your opponent to have a big turn where they don't replenish their hand. And now, often, yes, your opponent gets to pick the card that gets destroyed. But if there's no people in play, they have to choose a camp. They have to. And if there are people in play, you use this at the times where it's strategically important for you. So you make sure your opponent doesn't have cards in your hand. You spend your turn trying to chip their board down, get rid of their people. Oh, now all their camps are unprotected? Now I spend my 2. This has major upside. When Mercenary Camp looks good, it looks unstoppable. And when it looks bad is when your opponent draws all the cards and, oh yeah, I can discard 2 cards, no big deal. Paying 2 water to force your opponent to discard 2 cards is not great value. It's not the end of the world. It's better than an effect fizzling, but it's in the ballpark of an effect fizzling. Next up. All right, we have the Catapult. This is another draw 0 card, which I've said many times I'm not a fan of. And you can pay 2, damage any card, and then destroy one of your people. This is a strictly worse mercenary camp. Damage any card, then destroy one of your people. This lets you destroy something. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Catapult, but again, Blood Bank, Labor Camp, Octagon, things here. If you have the extra people to where you can put them in play and it's no big deal, why not? Do it. Next up, Command Post. Draw 2 cards. I like that a great deal. Pay 3 water. Deal a damage. This ability costs 1 less for each punk you have. Now this card, this is a card that I think handles the idea of synergy in a much healthier way. Yes, if you're playing a deck where you can't get punks in play, this is going to be pay 3 to deal a damage, which is expensive. It's not great. That's not a great exchange rate. Paying 2 to deal a damage is just a straight up printed effect on some of these cards. Paying 1 to deal a damage is a effect that some people have. So paying 3 to deal 1 damage is not a great cost, but you get to draw 2 cards. So you're drawing extra cards at the start of the game. You're starting the game with more resources in your hand, and maybe there's a time where your opponent has an unprotected camp and you spend the 3 to destroy it, and it's like, okay, yeah, it was expensive, but now that damage is locked in, that camp is gone, and that's fine. And maybe you have cards that let you generate some punks. Maybe one of the 2 cards you drew was a legendary that you don't want to put into play. Discard it, get a punk in play. Now this only costs 2. Now you're on rate. If you get a second punk in play, now you're paying cheaper than rate for a straight dealing damage card from a camp. I like the Command Post. I think this is a card that's worth thinking about, even if you never have the ability to discount the pay 3 for damage. There are sometimes use cases where it's just worth it to overpay a little bit for damage. The Arcade. Now this is a card that I have sort of talked about without naming multiple times in this video already. The Arcade, pay 1. If you have 0 or 1 people, generate a punk, and it lets you draw 1 card. The 1 card is fine. Paying 1 to generate a punk with 0 or 1 people. Yes, you have to have an empty board or small board in order to use this ability, but doing that, this is a great card to have if you're going first, because you're only going to have 1 water on turn 1. But if you use that water to throw a punk out before your opponent gets their first full 3 water turn, that's good. That feels totally strong. Plus, throughout the course of the game, you can put these punks out to sack to your Labor Camp or your Octagon or whatever other effect you need. I think the Arcade falls into, well, I mean, yeah, I'm gonna leave that at gold tier for now. Next up, Construction Yard. Draw 2 cards. Good start. Pay 1. If this card isn't damaged, flip over a destroyed camp and destroy this card. So there are almost no effects in the game that let you take a camp from being destroyed and turn it into not destroyed. In fact, this might be the only one. There's very few. This is, if not a unique effect, it's close to a unique effect. Now, the cost of it, however, is pretty big. So the only time you're going to be doing this is a situation where maybe your opponent had a sniper or something that got into your row and destroyed a camp, but you've still got 2 people in front of it. So this camp would, if it was face up, it would be heavily protected, whereas maybe your construction yard doesn't have any people in front of it. So what you're doing is trading your unprotected camp for a camp that is protected. That would be a use case where this power would come into effect. Another use case would be something like the Omen Clock. If you have, say, the Omen Clock and the Scavenger Camp, and those 2 cards are working together and doing cool synergy things, and your opponent put all their resources into getting rid of that Omen Clock, this would be a time where you could, okay, now I got my Omen Clock back, and it's worth it to essentially pay the 2 hit points. I guess you're moving them sideways. If you think of each camp as being worth 2 hit points, you've already taken 2 damage on one of your camps. it's dead. And then this camp has its full 2 hit points, because you can't do that once it's damaged. Most camps you can still use their powers even when they're damaged. This one specifically says if this card isn't damaged. So you do have to trade in a full health construction yard to get back one of your other camps. The only way I see that being something that I would ever want to do is if there's synergy between my camps, or if my board state leaves this card very vulnerable and one of my other camps not so vulnerable. The draw 2, however, kind of saves this card for me. So while based on ability alone, I would be putting this into the bronze level, I'm going to go ahead and bump it up to silver entirely on the back of the fact that you have 2 draw off of this. So that's fine. Even if I never use the power, drawing that extra card at the start of the game doesn't feel bad. Next up, we have the Scud Launcher. Draw 0 cards, not great, but pay 1 and then your opponent damages one of their cards of their choice. The head games with this card are great. It's so much fun to pay the 1, let your opponent sit there and bake their noodle thinking, okay, this is the best card to damage, and then immediately punish that choice, whatever else is in your hand. Sometimes even if it's not the optimal strategy that I was going to go for, I will punish the selection they made by trying to destroy the thing that they damaged just to play the head game. I love the Scud Launcher. I think this is a really, really good card. Pay 1 for damage basically anywhere. Sometimes they'll even damage a camp to leave the people up in front of it, and then you can force a raider through by junking some cards or whatever, and your opponent will feed you a victory because they make the wrong choice with the Scud Launcher. Great card. This has got to be a tier 1 gold level camp. Next up, the Garage. This is my favorite camp in the game. It's not close. The draw 0 is pretty terrible. I get it. And considering how much of a big deal I've made about the cards that say draw 2 and draw 1, but the drawback is fine. This is pay a water, advance a raid. If you combine this plus a Scavenger Camp and an Omen Clock for 4 water, you can have a raid go off all in 1 turn. And you can do it basically every time if you've got the cards in hand that you can junk for that 4th water. The Garage is excellent. This is another one of the starter camps. That draw 0 does hurt. So generally if I take the Garage, I try to couple it with at least 1 card that lets me draw 2. But if all my camps have the ability to do raidery stuff, it puts my opponent in the position where they don't know where to hit first. And cheap raids, man, you can't do better than that in this game. Raiding is so good. Resonator. Draw 1. Pay 2, destroy an unprotected damaged card. So it's okay. So you have to put, even though it says destroy, normally destroy feels really good because you're able to target something that's at full health and wipe it off the board entirely. Resonator doesn't let you do this. Even as cool as this card art is, I haven't talked about card art basically this whole thing, but as somebody who grew up in love with Back to the Future, this card art is delightful. It reminds me so much of that first anyway. So you pay 2 and destroy an unprotected but damaged card. So functionally, this could say pay 2, deal a damage. Because you're never, ever going to do 2 points of damage, which normally the destroy symbol means you're dealing 2 points of damage at once. This one has to target something that's already taken damage. So if you think about this as just pay 2, deal a damage, it's on rate. It's fine. It's not a great deal. It's not a bad deal. It's just fine. You're only drawing 1 card off of this. It's fine. I wouldn't feel mad if this showed up in the 6 camps that I had to choose my 3 from, but I'm not excited about it either. It's just fine. Like vanilla ice cream. Next up, we have the Mulcher. Draw 0. Boo. 0 cost, destroy one of your people, then draw a card. When you have this combined with things like the Arcade or the Oasis, it gets nutty. You can draw a lot of cards. When you have this combined with no ability to get a bunch of cheap disposable bodies on the board for you to feed to the Mulcher, it is a draw nothing, do nothing camp. I'm not a fan. Again, comboed with the correct cards, let me just blanket statement. Just because a card's in tier 3 or a bronze metal camp, as I'm putting it, does not mean that it's unplayable, does not mean that it's bad. It just means it's asking more from you as a player to get good value out of it, or that it puts you in an awkward position to get the value out of it. The most awkward one we haven't hit yet, but we'll talk about that when we get to the Obelisk. So I want to be clear. I don't think there are any camps in the game that are dumpster tier. Like there's no combination of 3 camps that's an auto loss. There's no combination of 3 camps that's an auto win. There is a good balance between the camps in this game, but some of them you have to work a little harder to either satisfy what they want from you in order to generate the value that makes them worth it, or some of them you have to overcome a deficit in order to get the benefit. The camps that don't force you to work harder or overcome a deficit are the ones that I'm putting into what I'm calling Tier 1 or Gold level. Next up, we have the Pillbox. This is another one. I love the artwork on this so much. Draw 1, so that's fine. Pay 3, which is a little expensive. Deal a damage. This ability costs 1 less for each destroyed camp you have. So this works on kind of a similar wavelength as the Mercenary Camp, where the more bodies you have in play for the Mercenary Camp, the cheaper the ability is. This one, the closer you are to losing the game, the cheaper the ability is. You start off by paying 3 to deal 1 damage, which is above cost. It's too expensive. It reduces down to paying 2 to deal 1 damage, which is on rate. And it's not until... So the only situation where you will ever be able to use this at a discount is if your other 2 camps are dead, and this is the only camp you have left. Yeah, I mean, sometimes pay 1 to deal 1 damage, and then having that extra water left over to push... Well, you wouldn't be able to push a raid through with this, but to put a body onto the board, like maybe you play out a gunner or something, just to get somebody in the way. This is a playable. Now, this is not one of my favorites. If this was a me tier list, this one might be a little bit further down, generally because I'm not a fan of any card that requires me to be losing the game in order to get good value out of it. But I can see how, as your opponent uses their resources to put damage elsewhere, this could even potentially be a target based on how it gets cheaper the more damage you've taken. If your opponent targets the Pillbox first, well, that maybe means your garage didn't get hit until a second or third priority card because they were worried about the discounted damage that could be coming from this. That effect is definitely worth consideration. So because of those kind of maybe narrow use cases, I'll go ahead and put the Pillbox at silver tier, even though personally I not everybody thinks of games the way I do, and I just get resentful about the idea of having to be losing in order to get value. That's something I don't, as a player, personally enjoy. That said, if you like that kind of play pattern where, haha, you thought you were winning and I'm going to come from behind and get you, this is a playable card. Again, it's not a bad card. It just doesn't necessarily fit what I think is optimal within, well, any game. I don't want to play any game where I have to be losing in order to generate value off of a card. Not into that. Next up, the Watchtower. This is a draw 0. Boo. Pay 1. If any event resolved this turn, deal a damage. Watchtower plus Garage, Scavenger Camp, Omen Clock. This thing is good. This thing... Pay 1 to deal 1 damage. That's slightly below what I would consider like rate. 2 for a damage is, in my mind, what I consider to be like fair market value for 1 damage. So this lets you pay half of that to deal a damage. You have to have resolved an event this turn, though. What do your other camps do? If your other camps let you push raiders through, great. This is an excellent pick. This is a great synergy camp for a Garage or a Scavenger Camp. Do you have a Omen Clock to combine this with so that you can advance, play more actual event cards as opposed to just focusing on raiders, which is typically my strategy? Great. That opens this up. I think this is a very solid pick. But again, it kind of depends on what other cards... Like, if you're relying on typical events and not raiders, you're very draw dependent. You're going to want to see some other camps to let you draw additional cards or generate extra water that you can then spend on additional cards to try to make sure that you're pushing events through. Even that 0 cost event or any of the 0 activation events are really good with this. If you're not doing that, and you can't really guarantee what you're going to draw in this game other than to maybe select a camp that gives you additional draw cards. This could end up being a 0 draw, 0 effect, blank camp if you don't have the right kind of hand composition to make sure events are going off to be able to deal the damage. There's some risk and reward there. I'm inclined to say if you draw other camps that work well with Watchtower, like Watchtower plus Garage, Watchtower plus Omen Clock, that type of thing, you can probably take it and feel totally good about it. If it's this plus 2 other non-event related camps, why did you take this? Trade this out for one of your 6. The Obelisk. Okay, so I'm going to be a hypocrite on this one. Normally, I love anything that lets me draw cards. I'm willing to pay almost any drawback in almost any card game to draw extra cards. And this is the only draw 3 effect in the entire game. It's the only camp that lets you draw more than 2 cards. So 3 cards. The drawback is you have to destroy this at the beginning of the game. So the payment is you're going a full third down on hit points to get 3 cards. And your opponent with the same play, so to speak, is drawing 2. So you don't even get that much advantage. In the games where your opponent selects like 3 camps that draw 0, this card could be really big. But that doesn't happen. Nobody does that. I think everybody who's playing this at a competitive level should be looking for cards that let you draw 2. You want to be starting most games with 3 cards in hand. Yes, this is a 1 camp optimal starting hand size all in one, but at the cost of 2 life, 2 permanent life, because you can't, other than the construction yard, you cannot recover this card. And even if you do use the construction card to recover it, it doesn't do anything anyway. So you're not only paying 2 life at the start of the game, you're paying the opportunity cost of not having a camp where you could have had some kind of an impactful ability. This might be the only card that I would say is a dumpster tier camp in the whole game. I am not a fan of the Obelisk, and after anybody who's been around the build phase for a while has heard me rant and rave about how much I love cards, how I'm a greedy, hungry, card-drawing hog. This card has shown me the limits of my greed. I am not willing to pay a full third of my life total for the game and the opportunity cost of having a third of what should be my camp abilities erased just to draw those extra cards. I don't think it's enough value. I think that should have been 4. Should have been draw 4 cards if you're going to make me give up a camp immediately right at the start of the game. I don't think the Obelisk is good value. Next up, the Nest of Spies. You draw 1 at the start of the game. Pay 1. If you have 2 or more people in play, deal a damage. So this falls kind of into the same camp as, Labor Camp, Blood Bank, Octagon. These cards that want you to have a board in order to get value out of it. This one's fine. It's okay. It's a little bit of a win more card. If you have 2 or more people in play and you have excess resources to where you can pay for this, cool. But this is not gonna dig you out of a deficit. This is not gonna allow you to come back. This 1 extra damage, if my opponent passes me the game and I have no dudes in play and I have to get 2 dudes in play to be able to pay this and use this power, things are not going well for me. So I think Nest of Spies is a totally acceptable card. This is sort of like the pure definition of, it's fine. It's fine. It asks a little bit of you, but it's something you want to do anyway generally, which is put stuff on the board. It doesn't have some kind of a drawback to it if you don't satisfy its condition. You get to start with 1 card, which is fine. This power's fine. It's just, it's fine. Maybe teetering on tier 3. The Outpost. Oh, this is another one of my favorites. So you draw a card at the start of the game, pay 2 to do a raider, pay 2 to heal something. So this is very similar to, was it the Transplant Lab? Nope, that's not it. Which one is it? Very similar to the Scavenger Camp, sorry. In that it lets you both raid and heal. This gives you an unconditional heal that's a little bit more expensive. Paying 2 for a heal is totally on rate. I have no problem with doing that. I actually kind of prefer this card to the Scavenger Camp, particularly in camp compositions where I don't have access to event acceleration. So if I have the Omen Clock, I might choose Scavenger Camp over Outpost, and then with my 3rd card, try to get something that lets me draw 2. That would be a camp composition I would go for. If I don't have the Omen Clock, I'm probably taking Outpost over Scavenger Camp anytime I'm given that choice. That said, absolutely excellent card. Huge fan of the Outpost. Man, all my best cards are kind of leaving. There we go. Better. Next up, we have the Railgun. So you don't get to draw any cards with this, and you can pay 2 to deal 1 damage. So you're basically getting on-rate damage and no card draw. So you're paying 1. Think of it as paying a card from hand to get access to a power that's not even at a discount. I am not a fan. I do understand why that card's in the Learn How to Play recommendations, though. Bonfire. Oh, man. So one of my first games of Radlands, I played over the internet with my friend John, the guy who actually bought me my set of Radlands, got me into the whole ecosystem. And so since we're playing over webcam, I don't know the camps yet. I haven't learned them all, and I can't necessarily read them for myself. And he has this Bonfire. So this is draw 1. Okay, let's start a game. Pay 0, damage this card, then heal any number of cards. And once it's damaged, this card cannot ever be restored. It can't be healed. I had his 2 other camps were both damaged. I had multiple of his people damaged. And he just goes, okay, well, I'm going to damage this and I'm going to heal 5. Is that right? The thing about the Bonfire is if you're playing against a player who doesn't know what the Bonfire does, you're going to get huge value turns out of this card. If you protect heavily here and leave your other camps exposed and allow your opponent to be baited into putting their damage on those other camps, and then you get to do 1 damage and heal both your camps, maybe a couple people, that is bonkers. That is so much value. The problem is you're only going to get to do that to somebody once. Once somebody sees a Bonfire go off, they are never going to let it happen again. They're going to put everything into targeting this card before they deal damage to any other camp. Now, Raiders, you don't get to choose where they go. Your opponent gets to choose. So your opponent, but if it's me, I'm not even going to send raids out until I deal with this stupid thing. I am never going to lose a game on the back of letting my opponent have a 5 heal Bonfire turn. Get out of here. So how good is this card going to be long term? I think the value of this card is going to go increasingly down as more and more people learn the game, more and more people get familiar with how Radlands works. At a certain point, nobody's going to be playing the Bonfire anymore because you're always going to see it coming. There's no way to surprise your opponent with it. And if I know you have this, this is where I'm going first, because to go elsewhere is silly. I'm going to invest my resources in putting damage that you're going to be able to heal for 1. That's no, never. I'm never going to do that now that I know what I'm doing with this card. So where does that leave Bonfire? I think it leaves it as potentially one of the weakest camps in the whole game. If a card is only really good against players who don't know what they're doing, I can't say it's anything other than not a great card. Like you have to rely on your opponent to make a blunder to get solid value out of this card. That doesn't feel very good. So I'm going to put this down here in the bronze tier as one of my least favorite camps. All right, next up we have the Reactor. Draw a card at the start of the game. Decent start. Pay 2, destroy this card and all people. This thing's great. Now, it's not great in every game, and your opponent will try to play around it and manage their resources a little bit. And if you have this card, that's another really important thing. You can't rely on this button to bail you out of serious trouble and then flood the board with your hand. If you dump your hand onto the board and then this is your get out of jail free card, you lose all your value as well as your opponent losing all their value. So in the games where I'm showing Reactor, one of the things I like to do is try to put something out. I play enough resources out to the board to kind of bait my opponent into committing their resources, but I want them to go harder than I do. If you have more dudes on board than your opponent, this is an insane card to use. Unless edge case, if your opponent has like a protected Mulcher Stang that you have no other way to get to it, it's okay to kill more of your dudes to get to Mulcher. That guy's a problem. So this card does require some finesse because you can easily overcommit to the board and end up doing more damage to yourself than you do to your opponent. And you never, ever, in any circumstances, want to do more damage to yourself than you do to your opponent. That said, this card is hugely powerful. You can wipe so much. I have seen 6 damage turns with this, where my opponent has full 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people in play. I guess that's actually a 12 damage turn. I said it wrong. But they have a full board, all their sites are protected, they're feeling really good, and then I slam my hand down on the nuclear reactor. I pay 2 full hit points on a camp, and I deal a total of 12 damage to the opposing board. Now again, very similar to Bonfire, how experienced is the player? As people get more and more experienced, they're going to see this card and they're going to not flood their people out to the board until this card is dealt with, because otherwise it's a vulnerability. If I put 10 water worth of dudes in play while you're still showing this, you can spend 2 water and nuke my 10 water. That is a terrible exchange rate. So I think as players get more sophisticated, we're going to see this card fall in popularity because it's something that you can very much play around. And in general, competitively speaking, if you need your opponent to make blunders or in order to get value out of a card, it's probably not a great card. So I'm going to put the Reactor down there in tier 3, although again, it has some crazy edge cases where it looks very, very good. Next up, we have the Cash. This is a draw 1 card, pay 0, and damage this. Then you can either draw a card or heal or generate a punk. Flexibility is great. Is flexibility worth 1 of your 6 damage points for the entire game? What is that, 15%, 20%, somewhere in that range of your total health? You're going to pay that to draw a card, heal something, or generate a punk. That's not great value. That being said, there are certainly going to be situations where that 1 extra damage wins you the game. The ability to, for free, you don't have any kind of a payment other than a little bit of your health, put damage out into the world or heal an important card. Maybe you heal a legendary that then allows other cards to do so. There are certainly use cases for this. However, the cost is very, very high. You have to be careful with this one because you can deal 1 damage to yourself to deal 1 damage to somebody else and feel like, oh, that's good, it's equal, and then you get punished for having a camp that's not fully healed. You end up losing the game because you put that 1 damage somewhere. I would probably only use this in desperation situations. Like I need exactly a card that I can junk to finish a raid, or I need, because raids can get, this is, or heal some, I was going to say damage, that's wrong. So this is a situational card. The flexibility is pretty good, but because you have to make yourself a little bit more vulnerable to losing the game in order to get any value out of it at all, I think I'm going to put that solidly into the silver tier. Next up, we have the Canon. Draw 1, pay 1, and deal a damage, then damage this card. In the games where you have some kind of a renewable healing resource, like using the Outpost here, or the Scavenger Camp? Yeah, the Scavenger Camp. Anywhere, or if your hand ends up just drawing into cards that allow you to get some healing, this can be a good source of damage. If you don't draw any healing cards, which again is not under your control, the deck is random and you can't cut cards out of it. It's the same deck every time, so you have the same chance of hitting healing cards or not hitting them, then this is pretty bad. Pay 1 to deal a damage is okay. It's a little bit of a discount from what I would consider market rate for a point of damage, but you also have to pay 1 hit point, like 20% of your total health, or 50, whatever it is. That's expensive. Now, if you can do this and heal it right away, that's less bad. Like if you have a heal bot in play and your turn for your 3 water is pay 1 here to deal a damage and then pay to your heal bot to heal this back up, that's probably an okay turn. I think that's passable. But in general, this card, I don't think it's that great. I'm not a big fan of any card that forces me to damage my own camp in this game. It's just too, once you're damaged, it only takes 1 more point of damage. Everything's so fragile. Next up, we have the Training Camp. Draw a card, pay 1, flip over 1 of your punks. If it's a person, it enters play and it is not ready. If it's an event, discard it to gain a punk and a water. That's very good. This is good value. This could potentially get a 3 water, like a legendary card in play for almost free. You're paying 1/3 of the cost. This could sneak attack somebody. Oh, I've got the ability to deal 1 damage to all unprotected characters. I'm going to hit those punks. Oh, the punk turned into a person. Now I can't get through. It could potentially generate extra water for you on a turn where you need it. I think the Training Camp is quite good. The only thing that would have pushed this card a little bit higher up is if it let you draw 2 instead of 1. But that power is very quality. I like it a lot. Atomic Garden. Draw a card at the start of the game. Pay 2 water. Heal a damaged person and they become ready. Now that become ready text is really important. Normally when a card is damaged and you restore it, it's not ready. You can't use its powers that turn unless a person. camps you can use whether they're damaged or not. The ability to heal somebody and use their power in the same turn. Now, paying 2 to heal somebody that's going to be a lot of your water resources for the turn. But if you can do this and then you have an extra 2 water to, say, use your sniper and hit a protected thing for damage, this has definitely won me games. I think the Atomic Garden is quite good. The healing alone has high value, but the fact that it makes a character ready when your opponent isn't prepared for that character to be able to use their power, that can end games. Catching people by surprise can end games in general. This is a great example of a card that can do that pretty easily. Finally, we have the Adrenaline Lab. Kind of suitable that this was the last card, being that Radlands is the Adrenaline Lab. You draw 1 at the start of the game, pay 0, use this ability, and any one of your damaged people use the ability of any one of your damaged people. You still have to pay for the power, and then destroy that card. This can win the game. Again, very similar to the Atomic Garden. If you have a powerful character out in play, and I put damage on that character, I feel safe from that character. Adrenaline Lab and Atomic Garden both allow you to take a character that your opponent thinks is not going to be able to do anything next turn and get value out of that character. Those sneak attack wins taste delicious. I think the Adrenaline Lab is actually quite good in that end of game type of situation. The problem is you have to destroy it. So in the mid game, if you're not going for the kill, you're paying a whole card. You're paying a whole person. You're potentially leaving a camp unprotected to use their ability once. How many times per game are you really going to take advantage of the Adrenaline Lab power? Probably not a lot. Most generally speaking, I would rather have a damaged person protecting one of my camps than use whatever that person's power is and leave my camp unprotected. Because of that, I think I'm going to knock the Adrenaline Lab down to level 2. I'm going to put it at the silver tier as opposed to the gold tier. And that brings us to the end of the camp list. And that concludes the tier list portion of this video. I did sprinkle in a lot of analysis on each individual camp because while I don't think there is such a thing as an auto-win combination of camps or an auto-loss combination of camps within Radlands, the game is overall very well balanced. Camp selection does matter. The camps that you're throwing back into the pool matter. The camps that you are choosing to play with and the way they either synergize or don't synergize will either grease the skids on your way to victory or actively hamper and get in the way of you having the ability to respond to your opponent's actions with the same kind of power level. I took a few minutes and reviewed my overall placements after the video, and I don't have any changes that I want to make. The analysis that I performed in real time on the video, I think holds pretty true. And if I were in a situation where I was looking at my camps and trying to determine which 6 I wanted, I still think that the number 1 camps are more or less number 1 and number 2. Some of this is going to be personal preference. I certainly value different parts of the game more or less highly than other players might. So don't take this as being direct orders that you must always choose the Atomic Garden over the Reactor. That is not the case at all. But I do want this to be hopefully helpful to players as they get better at Radlands. And as you play more, you're going to learn what camps you like and what camps fit with your playstyle. And your tier list might not look exactly like mine, although I imagine the analysis that we both perform on the cards shares a lot of similarities, even if it's not exactly the same where we value each individual metric. So we're here at the end of the video. Go win some games.